Yes, here we are again. I hope you have received some interesting input so far from the talks and from the workshops. We will have 50 minutes here on this digital sofa to talk about co-working and co-creation in this interdisciplinary teams. And before we get started with our guests, please allow me to introduce my co-host, Joanna Pope, who will be presenting some of the talks today and tomorrow.
Thank you, Katja. Yeah, it's great to be back for another year of the Digital Lab. And as you said, I will be hosting and moderating some of the events today and tomorrow.
Great to have you on board. And now I would like to introduce our guests on the stage for the coming discussion. Joining us is Eva Meyer-Keller, a Berlin-based artist who works at the interface of performance and visual arts. We have OMSK Social Club, also Berlin-based, whose work take place between the world we live in and the world of role play. More on this in a moment. And then we have Christian Stein, a computer scientist and linguist at the Humboldt University of Berlin, who is also involved in the gamelab Berlin. Welcome on the stage.
Fantastic. So now that we have all of our speakers and our moderators here together, I think it would be wonderful if we could start this discussion hearing all of the speakers describe in their own words, what is your creative practice? What do you work with? What is the terrain that you're in? And I think it would be great if we could maybe start with Eva. Would you like to tell us a little bit more about what it is that you do?
All right, my pleasure. So I think of myself as someone who works with mostly performance and with objects, bodies, and ideas. And as someone who does create things mainly for other people to make associations with. And I insist in a way of making as thinking and as thinking as a way of moving and moving as a way of thinking. And in the recent years, I've been busy with natural science. So I've engaged with natural sciences. And I want to just mention briefly two projects of the last years. The first one is Some Significance, where I looked at models in physics that depict things we cannot see. And I work a lot with everyday objects, and we have 4 women on stage, and we are enacting these models of atoms or of 6-dimensional space-time, which of course there's a discrepancy of the elevated model and the means we do it with. And as a next one in the series, I work with, from the smallest units in physics, we went to work with the smallest living unit in biology, which is the cell. And these processes have been accompanied always with a scientific team. And this one was accompanied by the Simone Reber lab that works with the spindle, which is when the cell organizes itself into the spindle. So the chromosomes line up in the middle and they're about to be torn into 2 cells. So that influenced very much our process. And also, what also influenced very much the process of this piece was my personal life, which was extremely challenging at this point. So to a degree that I couldn't function as usual. So not only the question, what is life seen through scientific means, but also how does life feel like, or what is life how we live it, and not under like these objective means, became totally meshed and disentangled. And in our performance lab, we didn't want to keep it clean, but contamination was more than welcome. And here I can show an excerpt of this video that I sent. Yes, so the cell reorganizes itself all the time. And so this is also what we do. We have these very, very, very many objects on stage, and cameras and technology and food. And we rearrange the stuff in the middle, like the chromosomes on stage, attach certain belts to it, and over again we divide. So we pull on on those belts. And as you see, it's all lined up in the middle. As time goes on, we do go from one cell division to the next, over 90 minutes of this performance. Yeah, and here with other means, there's like a tampon mitosis. And there's different views from different cameras. So sometimes you get the perspective of the microscope from the top. Sometimes we have like here a camcorder on stage, and we have also another camera that shows with a macro lens, very detailed excerpts. And we do this performance by never getting up. So we slide on our backs amongst this stuff, and we transport it, carrying it on our backs. So the performers are not only us four women on stage, but also all this stuff. So we're performing, and this stuff is influencing very, very much how we move and how we are with each other. So the objects and materials are a very important part that helps us. Yeah, that's an actor as well. Should I stop here and let somebody else talk?
I think it would be wonderful if we could now actually hear from OMSK Social Club as well, because I think there's some very interesting parallels in your work. So would you like to present, I think we have a single slide, or?
Sure. Thanks for having me. And yeah, I just want to talk a little bit about Social Club and how we work with Bleed. Maybe we could see this presentation. Thank you. So just to first of all introduce Social Club, we are a kind of roaming collective that's sprawls and recoils depending on its form or output. We were established in around 2016, and really OMSK performs itself as a facilitator of role-playing environments inside the contemporary art world. The group works closely with a network of core and public players. Everything is kind of unique and unrehearsed, and the game designs and installations are created to examine kind of virtual egos, popular experiences, and political phenomena, allowing the works to become a kind of dematerialized hybrid of modern day culture, alongside the participants' of course unique personal experience. In the past, we've introduced landscapes and topics such as the ontology of the avatar, rave culture, survivalism, catfishing, desire and sacrifice, positive trolling, and algorithmic strategies of organization and decentralized cryptocurrency. In a way, OMSK as a concept has always pitted itself in Bleed, which is what I want to speak about today. Bleed, in a way, is half reality and half fiction. The door is left open between the two. Could I have my presentation back for the whole duration of my talking? Or are we gonna like split and then move between each other, or should I present it now?
Feel free to keep going. Yeah, I think it's great. And we can have the visuals to see what you are explaining to us.
Perfect. So what you can see in front of you is a diagram that seemingly maps three similar experiences of rave culture. But actually there's very, very subtle differences in like how they're actually performed. And this is kind of what I want to talk about. So if you think about reality or consensual reality, or the world in which we live in day to day, as one position, and then fiction, the imagination, the unconscious, the subconscious, dream space, fantasy in the other hand. And then you have this kind of corridor between the two. This is normally what we understand to be bleed space. And in a way, this is really kind of where we pit our works. So the three images that you can see, firstly on the top left-hand corner, this kind of like very orange lit one. This is actually a role-played rave. It's a crypto rave, which I'll go on to explain about more later. Then the one in the right-hand corner, this is from Intonal, which of course is a very famous festival that takes place every year here in Berlin. And then at the bottom is actually a series. It's a series called Beat, which was released last year, which was about the Berlin club scene. So this is completely and utterly acted out. And I think that there's some pretty interesting discrepancies between all of these kind of different variations and how they, to the unknown eye, actually become like simulacra of the reality space. So, to talk a little bit about bleed. Bleed is a kind of highly disputed term inside role-playing genres. Most live-action role-play communities would kind of argue that this should not be encouraged, this kind of corridor in the middle, nor should it be cultivated. The phenomenon known as bleed occurs when emotions from a character affect the player out of the game and vice versa, such as when they affect the character in-game to an uncontrollable point that they cannot return to reality in the same state they had left it. One of the most common discourses surrounding bleed in live-action roleplay is normally about love. The typical construct being that if you are in-game playing a love interest or a crush, it can bleed out of the game and into reality. And often in online forums, you can see this term LARP crush, which kind of explains this unrequited love that's been played out in-game. The main problem is it seems that at the end of the game means losing the love of your life or the love of the game or this love space, which begins to affect the person on a daily level and can lead, as any love interest be it in-game or not, to an emotionally disabled state for the player. One could kind of argue the sense of reality or loss of it in role-playing environments makes it harder for the person affected to come to terms with the LARP crush as just a symptom of role-playing. And then they instead yearn for that closeness in daily life. So they cannot like create a door that allows one thing to stay in one world and one the other, because there's a sort of yearning and need for it. And then they begin in a lot of these LARP forums to wonder to themselves, like, was this real or was this not? And that really is like when it gets very complicated. But what is real? Everything.
Sorry, just to jump in on that very interesting note, I think we'll have to kind of come back to that question afterwards, just so we can briefly hear from Christian as well. But I would love to keep exploring this, what is real, with all of us together. So let's do this shortly. So Christian, if you'd also like to just jump in and share a little bit about your work.
Sure, no problem. I will quickly show a screen. Yes. Actually, I was very happy that we are having a talk today under a title that includes interdisciplinarity, because personally, I am coming from a very, very interdisciplinary background that has had also a lot of influences to the gamelab Berlin, which I'm leading together with Tom Lilge, and have founded it like 6 years ago at the Humboldt University. Just to say one thing about this gamelab Berlin, this is me being there with one of our games. This is always a highly interdisciplinary question when it comes to game creation. How do we design games, and what do these games actually mean? Which impact do they have on people? The context at Humboldt University is originally the excellence cluster Image, Knowledge, Gestaltung, and that one has had actually 46 disciplines working together. So that's a whole lot of different knowledge cultures, different ideas about the world, different methods and perspectives. And we realized that there is a way to connect all these different cultures with a method that we call play thinking, and that is deeply around the question, how can we use games and gamified structures to grow together and to work together. Very quickly, oh yes, there is a big citation that kind of connects what games could mean for us from Friedrich Schiller. It translates to English like, because to finally say it outright, man plays only where he is man in the full meaning of the word, and he is only fully man where he plays, of course referring to she and women also. But this reference basically makes clear that we are basically playing all the time in our lives, and sometimes we realize it, sometimes we don't. But anyhow, these game structures, we can find them anywhere in the world. So very, very quickly, the question, why are games actually important? They are important because they are everywhere. In at least in Germany, it's 34 million people playing computer games regularly. The average age is 38 of a computer game player, and 48% of the gamers are women. So games are really in the center of our society, and we believe that designing games for knowledge transfer, designing games for new ways of cultural production is the way to go in these times. Why is that the case? Because games have something we call the magic circle. In this magic circle, there are other rules active than in the outside world. And this can create spaces of freedom and spaces of protection where people can actually act out something that they would be too afraid or too pressured in the real world. And it's also important to say that in games you can invent yourself in a new way. So this degree of freedom, that is very, very important when it comes to games. And also that we have games in the way that they are not actually meant to provide a certain purpose. That doesn't mean that everything I learn in the game, everything that's done in the game doesn't have any effect. It has a permanent effect on us, but probably that's not what a game should actually be addressed like. Then, of course, there is this whole topic of gamification that is trying to use this incredible power of games to have an effect outside the game world. And that can either horribly go wrong or be very effective. And probably that's also something to discuss about. Last slide, very quick overview about some of our project at gamelab Berlin. So we are a small interdisciplinary group still at Humboldt University. For example, at Golem on the left top corner, we did a VR dance performance with performers and virtual reality technology to try out what we can do when these two things come together. We designed escape rooms. We are using, for example, a virtual reality application for training of neurosurgeons with Neurosurgery 360. We've sent whole suitcases of VR headset to schools to learn about water problem and climate crisis in Kenya. One of our spin-offs, RetroBrain, has created games for elderly people in nursing homes to get more active and socialize again. And maybe just to pick one more, the Mein Objekt project is a museum game that we did for the Humboldt Forum to help people to get a deeper and more emotional contact to objects in the museum. So this is where we'll stop. And
fantastic.
Yeah,
thank you. So we've gotten lots of input, I guess, lots to think about all the different ways that we approach in this group that we have here today, interdisciplinarity and really moving between different worlds of art and science, of science and games, and even between reality and fiction. So there's a lot of interesting border crossing going on. And I think it would be great if we could now go a little bit into detail with each of you and just think about and hear about as well, what do the kind of collaborative processes actually look like? So I thought we could start with Eva again to stay in the order. You work often with many other artists. And so in the example you showed, it was multiple artists working together to create this performance. What could you just say a little bit about this working process? How do you collaborate together to decide what you're actually going to do? And I would also be interested to know whether you have ever worked with your audience or the public as another kind of actor in your experiences.
Yeah, I mean, for each project, it's a bit different. With this Living Matters team, it's more or less the same one as Some Significance, and I'm planning to work on a third one, which will be called Nervous Breakdown, working title at the moment, working on the nervous system and perception. And that's also why I was so interested in your question, what is reality? Because so that's the where I'm going to go next. And I think here we're kind of, there are different people in the group. So one is a mathematician and a dancer and a lighting designer who's also performing. Then the other one's a philosopher who also dances. And so we come from, I'm very into when we grow over, like expand our competences. So, but also having worked with the same team from one performance to the next, which were quite big productions from my side, is we gain trust also in the process, trust in not knowing for a while where this is going to lead us to. And so it's also, I don't know, maybe referring to the other thing, it's creating a kind of game area, safe space to expand or explore things we don't actually know yet what will happen. I have one example, there's several, but one example I could pick out for where I included the audience or they became participants is in a performance I did together as a collaboration with Uta Eisenreich, a visual artist who lives in Amsterdam. And this was already in 2002. We were invited to a festival in Denmark, in Aarhus, and it was at the time called DigiArt. And 2002 computers were quite different. And so I was quite surprised to be invited to a digital arts festival, because the only thing I used digital at the time was a kind of mini DV video camcorder. And so we took this as an initiative to make a performance, especially for this, and we called it Ordinator. And at the time, computers were more ordering things. So we made a live space. So it was a gym hall, actually, and the people came in through the dressing room, and this was our firewall, and there they were interviewed by somebody. And this person installed them, and well, no, not quite yet. They kind of checked them what kind of personalities they had with this test. And then they came into the space and I was install it. So I installed the programs and gave the people manuals. And so there were things like FileMaker. First it was Property Explorer and Property Manager, because the system was fed with all the things they had in their pockets and bags. So people had to take out all their stuff from the bags and pockets, and someone would mark them with labels, and the file makers would pick them up and order them into groups of matches, cigarettes, tampons, water bottles, books, whatever you had with you. And then the other programs were, for example, trash can, who would attach trash on the string and drag it into the field in the middle, and a file repair service, who would repair things. And then there was a virus and Dr. Norton that would, anyway, so it went on like this. And the fields on the floor of this space were glued in rectangles, so that when we took a photo at the end, they would appear like desktop items. And this all was total nonsense. But it was a very playful thing that made people think of, like this one guy, there was a waffle burner who would actually make waffles and lay them out in a coordinate system. And he thought, yeah, maybe I'm a processor because things go out in and they go out again. Yes.
Thank you very much. I think this is kind of very interesting as well to think about this kind of setup you created there when you think about the project OMSK Social Club is dealing with. I read, like, for example, one word like the safe space, in a certain way you create these kind of spaces as well. I read in one of the articles about you as your work was described as an empathy training camp, something like that, in which the collective understands itself as a facilitator for role-playing environments, what you mentioned as well in your talk. And I would be curious to know if, as the participants in these role plays, I guess, come from totally different backgrounds and areas, how do you work there? Are there players who have a certain role from the beginning, or is this all established within the frame you set?
Thanks for the question. So basically, each work that we do, depending on the topics and subject matters, has a specific set of mechanics that's applied to it that would be actually like functioning in that world. So that kind of like sets the foundation. Also, we do have people from every walk of life, every universe, who come to join us. And some games, depending on how immersive they are scripted so that there will be like a kind of character laid out for them, whereas others are purely built in the workshops beforehand, where they basically map out their identity and their connection and different implementations that are active in that world. What I would say is really important for our practice is that a lot of this character, world making, solicitation of the unknown is actually kind of in the end secondary. The first and most important thing is about getting all of those people on the same level to be able to be vulnerable and trust each other, and to be able to orchestrate and implement a collective narrative. And so to give space, whether that be physical or mental, or even in a sense, a quite testing space. So where actually you don't just always allow somebody to have the descripting landscape exactly how they would want it, but how do you kind of fork and mutate and begin to kind of create an osmosis? Because in a sense, like everybody in this Zoom room right now, we could all potentially implement different worlds, but like how do we all come collectively to one world where we can all inhabit, even though we don't have the history of that world to hand, because we are making it up on the fly. And I think that maybe that's kind of the most important part of the work, and that often comes through, normally we run workshops to around 6 to 8 hours non-stop prior to the events, which work also a lot on kind of somatics. So a lot of kind of physical energy work. How do you actually use different parts of your body to organize and orchestrate like potential realities, and in a sense also to negotiate as a group, like who has the authority to make different realities and so forth. And of course that also comes into play with activating safe spaces and also debrief spaces, both like formally and informally at the end of each work.
Thank you so much. There was one question in the chat as well concerning your work, because you mentioned the term positive trolling, and it was asked if you could explain what you meant by that.
Yeah, for sure. So a lot of these works, they're not easy. Some of them may look very holistic and enjoyable, such as like a club or something like that. But these works are super difficult. It's like very, very hard to maintain another reality. Like it's a super fragile ecosystem. And what we became really interested in, and maybe touching back to Katja, what you said about this, our work being described as this kind of empathy training camp. When you're role playing, you actually constantly have to test what you believe in and what you sympathize and what you empathize with and what you understand. And quite often you may find out that there's a particular part of you that you thoroughly enjoy that you really don't actually want to be part of your personality or your belief system or your understanding. And maybe just to like take it slightly out of the meta here, quite often, if we make role-played environments, we try to have, I guess, like an array of characters. And maybe you might, quite a lot of people who end up playing characters that they would probably avoid in like everyday reality. They play those characters and they behave the way those characters do. But then quite often in the debrief, they will make up reasons why those characters behaved in that way, or they will have sets of emotions or stories or understanding. And I mean, I think that's really when we stop these kind of binary opposites of you are like this or left or right, you know, and then you actually begin to understand that it's like a lot more complex than that, because even if there is, and I think this is also very interesting in relation to games and Bleed, like particularly of the last years, where we see particular bleed of certain political fractions, particularly in gaming theory. And I think that's like when this kind of positive trolling happens, like you kind of have to troll yourself. And like until we actually do that, I'm not sure whether we're ever going to get over the hangover of the left wing.
Fantastic. It's great to have a bit more of an insight into that. It makes me very curious about the experiences as well. So it's been very interesting. We've heard both from Eva and from OMSK about the importance of trust, especially when we're working with different people in groups. And I was wondering, Christian, is that something that's also important for you in your very interdisciplinary setup at the Game Lab? Could you speak a little bit about, you know, what are the roles that are there? And how do these relationships work? How do you all work together?
Yeah, thank you for that question. I couldn't agree more. I think trust is one of the most important things, and on the other hand, it takes time to grow it. And this is something that also have to be balanced always in projects we do at the Game Lab, because the question is, you can have kind of endless meetings where people are talking and talking and talking, and you can have the feeling that this is necessary to build a team, but there's also a danger there that this kind of talking doesn't become productive in a sense, or even gets on side routes that are not helpful. So what we normally do to avoid these deviations and still build a trust level that works for everyone is we basically take the process of game creation as a game. So we say, okay, what's happening here is right now completely independent from all the considerations of the outside world that you might bring in. So of course you have that knowledge, but kind of put it to the side for a moment and let's be creative together. And what we also try to do is bring in many voices from the beginning, even from from disciplines or knowledge cultures that might be far-fetched and not connected to our normally academic background. Because we have the feeling the earlier we bring in many voices, the easier it is to actually understand what are the possibilities to navigate in this space. And this directly relates to two more things that I just want to quickly mention that I think really helped us in interdisciplinary co-creation processes. And that is, the first one is to not combine the entering of this creative game creation space with commitments. So if I'm inviting somebody to get into this creative space and the feeling is, oh, there's coming a lot of tasks afterwards, you know, once you're in, you're kept as part of the group. And most of the things we are doing in our way of research depends on people voluntarily wanting to do what they want to do. So it's really important to understand what they want, not only what I want from them, but what they want to bring in, and not only what they could bring in, but what they want to bring in. If you understand that, I think you get a lot of more motivational power in a game design team. If you just allow them to also drop out of that creative session if they don't feel like it, you know, not join anymore. Because normally, at least in our world, it's once you're in the project, you're kind of stuck in it. And that stops people from connecting in that way of freedom that I just mentioned. And then the second thing about it is that we always create many ideas without selecting too early which one's going to be. We even try to create ideas that are pushing a certain, let's say, pathway to the limit without ever even thinking that this might be the final one. In game design, we say fail early, fail often. That is kind of a motto that many game designers have, because our way of going somewhere is always highly biased, no matter how many people we talk to, no matter how much we have read or how open-minded we think we are. And so creating an environment where failing is something constructive, because you can early see when you can still change something that you might have been wrong with an idea, then the product in the end will also match the audience better, I think.
Christian, one question to refer to that is, you said it takes a while, or we give it room before we select something. But who selects? How does it work? I mean, who takes the decisions in this process?
Yeah, I mean, normally we really try to do everything as democratic as it's possible. So we really, there are basically in our game design teams, there are no hierarchies or anything. We just discuss things. But normally we are creating games together with partners, for example, museums, for example, hospitals. And of course, these partners have a voice there too. So I have never had a situation when on a fundamental decision, you really had to, I don't know, vote over somebody. Because if you have built this basis of understanding, then you could far more easily come to agreements. And then people will also understand that it cannot always be their decision that is chosen in the end. So I think it is really not about building hierarchies of who can decide what, but building an atmosphere where these conflicts are avoided as far as possible.
Fantastic. That's very interesting. And so it's really striking, I think, from hearing all of you, you're very experienced in this quite complex work of creating the environments where people can really collaborate with each other. And you've also done many different projects or different efforts. And I was kind of curious, do you see it as a learning process? So each time you do a performance or you work on a game or create an experience, is there things that you take away from that? And how do you actually draw on that knowledge the next time you want to do something similar? How do you, and as a group as well, how do you store the knowledge that is held kind of in these people and in their bodies? I wonder if we could maybe hear first from Eva on this one.
It's definitely a learning curve. And that for me personally, and then for us as a team. And there also, I mean, each one has some certain personal interests. And then also, but like the projects, the performance, for example, if it turns out to be a performance, is not in that sense a didactic project, though. It's not going to transmit one-to-one what I've learned. So that's quite important. So there is a certain other translation, other forming out of the knowledge. And because also now, for example, I do this research on the brain, and that's also quite important now. Again, I think that will influence a lot how we will work together as a team, because our brain is there. It's unsustainable for our brain not to know. So our senses, so eyes, ears, whatever, all the senses are not windows to the world as we know it. And then we see what's out there. But the brain because it's like a buzz, some sort of colors or some sort of sound buzzing, and it doesn't actually make any sense. So how we perceive something is that our brain projects from what we already know and the experience we or have already gathered. So we can actually only see what we know. And that is a problem if you think of like implicit bias, or like if and of course, if you cultivate your input and your learning, you expand what you know. And so therefore, next time you can project other things, but in that moment, you have no choice. That's what happens. And knowing that actually now is really good because we don't actually see the same thing really. And yeah.
Fantastic. Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. Katja, yeah, please go ahead.
Yeah, what I would like to know is just like somehow, I think improvisation plays a big role in all of your projects, but you have to find, in the end, you have to find a form. And what I would be interested in the project or in the projects of OMSK is that your setups and the designs of installations, the games, they are always unrehearsed. You said they're unique, they're happening ones. What is your solution to just like conserving, archiving the knowledge which is generated and what is happening there?
So basically, I mean, at the end of the day, like we are conceptual artists. So in a way, whatever we make has the documentation or the archival procedure like has to be in line with the concept. So it changes quite a lot. So for example, a work that we did in the summer that was running for 58 days called Unrealism, that actually became a collectively written book, a preliminary experiment in a sense of like understanding what the internet is. So this became like a theory auto fiction novel, and that would be the documentation or what lives on, or like the report or understanding of the findings. Similarly, we have also created performance lectures that will be displayed in Ljubljana's up-and-coming biennial called Utopiates, where we actually used LSD whilst role-playing to understand the roots back to virtual and augmented reality from the 60s. And so each kind of time, these relics, so to speak, actually have to be part of the game. Like we never document something photographically unless it makes sense that there's a camera in the world. So yeah, I hope that answered the question.
That does make sense. I mean, it makes me think that you can also, think about documentation and archiving in a playful way. And I was wondering if that's also something that happens for you, Christian. You said you have playful working processes. in between your projects, is there any kind of playful approach that you employ to transfer the knowledge across your team and kind of retain it over time?
Yeah, I mean, of course, there are some formal methods that we use. We are using issue trackers, of course, for not forgetting anything we wanted to do, and working very closely with that when it's on an operational level. We have our digital communication lines that we even try to have some non-topic oriented co-operational time with tools like Teamflow, where just sitting in a virtual office, you're able to throw over this and that. So this kind of indirect communication, I think it's very important to transfer knowledge, but you also need a formal way. We have a wiki, for example, for all basic information that we need and learn from. And through this process of integrating a lot of people in early phases and talking with them, taking time to talk to them, there's a lot of possible thresholds coming up already in that process. And what we do in every talk is we do protocols. So there is nothing that when we are really on an operational level that we wouldn't document, because our brains are very forgetful after all, and everyone remembers also sometimes what they want to remember. So this is really helpful. So looking back in time and seeing, okay, what have we noted on that project? What were the situations there that really helps? What we don't do is, let's say, follow a method by the book. And I can explain you also why, because especially in this highly interdisciplinary background that we are working in, every project constellation brings in different expectations of how to work with each other. So it is simply impossible to go into a project and say, okay, we use these tools, these are our methods, and welcome, and let's start. That's not how it's being done. It's basically selecting together and deciding together for tools and methods, and also having the open-mindedness to change them if you see that they don't work in that constellation. And we do that basically all the time. We have even once adapted an agile development method for academic processes where you cannot directly implement that. So trying to come up with an idea of how to work together, and then over and over checking, is that idea still working, or is it just either something that any book told you to do, or something that has worked in another context but probably not this. This makes a lot of sense. I've seen projects where they have agreed on a method in the beginning. It didn't work from day one, but they kind of assumed that they should stay with it for years, actually. And this is a big mistake. I think the open-mindedness to address things that are not working, to have a space that you are integrating your experiences and ideas, this is the key of it all.
Thank you so much. Unfortunately, the time is running so fast, but Joanna and me, we thought for the last round, we prepared a little speculative exercise we wanted to go through with you. As we have talked a lot about co-creation and interdisciplinarity today, we thought maybe you could combine your individual approaches and invent something which put just like all your approaches together. How could this look like? How could you learn from each other? How could you collaborate and integrate some of the approaches you just have been listening to? That's right. Maybe we start with Eva.
I am fascinated by the speculative fictions, the merging of the different worlds and the fiction part of it. So I would love to dive more into that. I don't know, maybe you carry on and I'll come up with some more points in a moment.
Stein, do you think you could also apply kind of more performative techniques or also role-playing techniques, like perhaps to kind of warm everyone up who's working in an interdisciplinary team or something like that?
Absolutely. I mean, also we've been explicitly working with performers and dancers and actors in our games, because there's the whole idea of playing is not, you know, only the first idea of games that we have in mind, but role play is a very important part of it. And it also opens a freedom of thinking. If you're switching the role, you can say other things, you can act differently. And this switching between roles, we use that in our play thinking techniques normally to allow, just with a different terminology, to address things in a different way. And I think role playing is a great way to go there and cross thresholds of where you are in your life before you enter a project space. So I really think it has a high potential, definitely.
Fantastic. And I also wondered, just to wrap up, maybe if we could imagine in OMSK Social Club, whether you can have this meta level where maybe the participants are developing a performance similar to what Eva would do, or building a game inside a lab. I wonder what would happen in this kind of situation.
I mean, I think that's a perfect idea for work. I think actually, in a sense, this is something that does happen to a certain degree, but I think that it could be definitely more accentuated. And I think also the results of which would, I think, probably be like a little more manic than we normally allow our creations to be, because I think that there's also something fundamental about like euphoric feelings and the kind of adrenaline that one has like in gaming, and then if you like layered that onto top of creating, I think that it would be pretty interesting conclusion. Like,
one thing came to my mind still, and this is the thing of what you, Christian, you mentioned with changing, like don't sticking to a method that's not working. And I definitely think that, I mean, anyway, I try and start not using any methods, actually. I mean, try to unlearn, actually, which is quite difficult. So I think each project develops their own ways of working, and to attend to that and give it space with everybody involved, also like the artistic collaborators, but also the person who does production and everyone.
May I maybe make a very quick addition to that? I find that very descriptive also to say that from an interdisciplinary perspective, there are two things. There's multidisciplinarity and interdisciplinarity. Multidisciplinarity is more about optimizing the interface. Okay, you can do this and you can do that, you know, and I hand over this part of work and then you continue. This is basically not thinking together. It's optimizing a machine with humans inside. Interdisciplinary work is really thinking together and creating visions together that you share, actually, because you cannot work together if you don't share a vision with that. And that, of course, takes sometimes a long time to create a shared vision. I find this process far more interesting and fascinating than just optimizing something that's already there. And I think that's maybe why we are all in the creative industry.
Wonderful.
Thank
you.
That's a very good thought to wrap up this whole discussion on this digital sofa, to make as well the point between those different approaches. I think that's very important to keep in mind. Unfortunately, we already reached the end of this digital sofa. Joanna, she will be the host of the next lightning talk in already 5 minutes. here on stage. And thank you all for these great thoughts and inputs and your participation in the discussion. Thank you so much.
Thank you. It was fun.
Thank you. It was very nice.